Did you know we have a thriving global community of like-minded ancestral home cooks and homesteaders? Every day on our Discord forum, we are discussing what we're cooking, what we're growing, what we're thinking about, what our latest struggles are, and supporting each other to fully embrace this beautiful lifestyle. As a patron member, you can also choose to access an extra private podcast feed, which includes monthly intimate chats where Andrea and I talk in depth about what's happening in our lives and kitchens. There are over 90 recordings waiting for you there right now. In addition, we've got a massive collection of inspiring and helpful downloads for you, including many recipes and videos. And once a month, you'll get to visit with myself, Andrea, and the community as we come together live and in person. Visit ancestralkitchenpodcast.com for all the details on how to join us. Come be part of our world and change yours.
The cost of eating an ancestral, nourishing diet versus the cost of eating a conventional supermarket diet. People are already stretched to the limit on their grocery budgets. So how can we ask them to spend even more on buying more nutritious or local food? Even if it's important to them, what if the dollars literally do not exist? How are we to eat? These were the questions burning in my mind when I sat down with the Nourishing Traditions cookbook to make a list of 10 easy favorite recipes. I wanted to see how much more expensive they were to make at home with organic ingredients versus buying the cheapest factory version available, to help people figure out how they could accommodate them into their budget. But what I found astonished me. I was not prepared for the fact that almost every single recipe I calculated was actually cheaper to make with local or small farm, grass-fed, ancestral, organic ingredients. I couldn't put this episode together fast enough. I was so excited to share it with you. I got rather overambitious and included a total of 20 recipes. 5 of which are great examples of the local version costing slightly more. And they did not all fit in this episode. So Allison and I recorded an after show, which is now available on our private podcast, Kitchen Table Chats, which is included in the companionship level of support. Thank you for supporting our podcast and the work we do. I also dropped all my notes, including my tedious calculations of ingredients, into a document and uploaded it for supporters to download. This document has the titles and page numbers and price breakdown for each recipe. Without further ado, let's get into the episode now. Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast.
I'm Alison, a European town dweller living in England.
And I'm Andrea, living on a family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA.
Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen.
Hello, Allison. Good morning.
Hello, Andrea. Good afternoon, morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. Are you ready for a marathon recording session?
I am. We seem to have quite a lot of those recently.
I know.
I got some feedback from one of the supporters who said, your episodes since you come back from your break have been really good.
Hey, look at that.
Quite marathonly.
I'm glad they noticed. Well, we rested. We discussed a lot. We sorted out some of the way we structure and lay out and record things and how we bounce between us. We've been talking to each other enough that we can read each other's cues even without cameras really well. Yes, we have no cameras on, guys, when we record. We have no cameras. So we have to read each other's minds without actually talking.
Reading between the lines.
Yeah.
And it works usually, doesn't it?
Such a nice observation. Let's talk about what we ate.
Exactly. And what did you eat? Have you eaten this morning or was it last night?
Okay, so I didn't actually eat this morning, but I was going to tell you what my breakfast was yesterday because today will be the same thing.
Oh,
So
okay.
I
Yep.
have a jar of pork rillette in the fridge, which you can hear us talk about on episode 93 if you want to know what that is. It's like an ancestral trash food. So it's food that would have gone in the garbage otherwise. And it is so good. And then my brother-in-law made us a loaf of sourdough bread with a wheat called golden wheat, which I've never had before. And he used rye sourdough starter that I gave him. And I told him that you recommended the rye, and he came and told me, oh my gosh, the rye makes such a difference. He's like, this has got to be the most active sourdough starter I've ever had. And so that was good affirmation. And he's taking your Boza course, by the way. And
wonderful.
Yeah, he likes doing ferments. Then I had there was a jar with just a little homemade applesauce left in it. And there was a tiny bit of leftover homemade tapioca. And then, of course, I had sauerkraut on the side to go with the pork rillette. And I made a latte. So I steamed milk and had coffee that I got. There's a guy in town here who grinds coffee, and he sells it at my chiropractor's office. And yeah, so I thought I'll give that a try, and it was pretty good. So that was breakfast yesterday, and it is what I have to look forward to when I'm done here. So
it's a bit of an indulgence having pork rillette for breakfast.
I know, but you can do it because it's, frozen in a jar and there's no work to it. And you could eat it cold. I've done it cold in sandwiches before, but I'm heating it on the stove for breakfast. So
nice.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, we had pork heart for lunch. Oh, which I got today. from the farmer at the market. It wasn't on display. I said, have you got any offal? And he sort of went round the back into the boxes he had and came up with these 2 pork hearts. Cost me £2 for them, which is next to nothing.
Oh, look at that.
And I am working harder to get Gable to eat offal. So last night I got the pork hearts out and I trimmed off all of the bits of white fat on them. And then I opened them up and I made sure I got all the blood out. And I trimmed off all the kind of strong cartilage bits, on the inside of the heart, because those are hard to chew and they would just put Gabriel off.
Yeah.
And then I chopped it up really quite small, like in a dice. And then I covered it in a bit of milk kefir. I know that you do that for liver. I don't know whether you do it for heart, but I just thought I'd do it and see what happened, because anything I can do to have Gabriel eat it, the better. So left it in kefir overnight. And then today we did it in the Instapot. I left really detailed instructions for Rob. He is bonding, and I said this to him, he's bonding with the Instapot more than I am because he's using it more than I am. I tend to leave him instructions and he kind of gets on with it. But now he's just trying things and changing things up. And I was like, you've got an interesting relationship with this piece of kitchen equipment. So we had, what vegetables were left in the cupboard? There was onions, mushrooms, a bit of cabbage, Savoy cabbage, some peas and a little bit of green curly kale, and a paste with water and tomato kind of concentrate stirred in, and coriander, salt and pepper. And we put it in the Instapot for 35 minutes and it was delicious. The boys had it with some sourdough bread, but I fancied a potato, so I had mine with potato. And
what kind of potato?
Ate nearly all of it. I was expecting him to say, what's this? But he didn't. He did look at it just momentarily on the end of his fork as if to say, what's going on here? But he ate it, which was nice.
That's a win.
And I loved it too. So it's a win-win. And for £2, for 2 pig hearts,
come on,
I'll be asking him again if he's got any offal. I think. So, and it's lovely.
What kind of potato did you have?
I just had I don't know what type it was. It comes from the lady who we get our veg from at the market. We go to the same stall every week. She grows potatoes with a red skin. That's all I know.
Oh,
they've got a red skin.
I like that kind. Okay. And I put
them in the oven.
Steamed it? You baked it. Okay.
No, I put them in the oven. It was a bit of a luxury. I put a load of them in the oven. So then the rest of them are going in the fridge and I'll chop them up and fry them in lard later in the week.
That is a really good idea. I'm always thinking of ways to sort of batch my oven work because I don't like to run the power forever and ever.
Exactly.
And so now you're kind of making me think. I have a box full of red skin potatoes, actually from one of the little farms out here, and I could just bake a whole bunch of them. And
for all of you there who all eat potatoes, Gable doesn't eat potatoes.
Yeah.
Nor does Rob very much. But you could do a big oven load. I felt quite guilty putting the oven on. Usually we're like, right, we've got a bread, we're going to put roasted vegetables in at the same time. With oats. But this morning I was like, I really want a potato. I don't want bread today.
It's good to listen to those cues, though, when you're able, if you have access to potatoes and feel like you need a potato, then it's good if you can do that.
Exactly. I need a potato. I have a nice review to read now. Shall we move on to that?
Yeah, don't read any bad ones,
a lot to cover today. Yeah, no, I don't. I write them out on a piece of paper and set light to them and ceremonially burn them. So
well, if you want us to burn your review, leave a bad one. If you want us to read your review, leave a good one.
Just don't leave a bad one, please. Don't leave a bad one, especially not about one episode when we've done 100, that are actually all right and you don't like one of them. Please don't leave a bad review. Oh, you can, obviously. It's a free world.
No, it's not.
But this one isn't bad.
Only leave good ones.
Actually, that's true. It's not a free world, is it? This one is a really good review. 5 stars.
Thank you.
And it's from someone who's titled A Podcast Addict.
Oh.
And she called the review, Grandma Still Has Lots to Learn.
I love that attitude.
She said, I may be a grandma, but I grew up when processed food was new and seen by many as a blessing. I've learned so much to the contrary in the past 10 to 15 years, and this podcast has truly blessed me with much good food for thought. I especially love the podcast about ancestral cooking from various countries and would love to hear more of that. Maybe Sweden. Keep up the great work that you have begun.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Podcast Addict. And I remember doing the ancestral cooking episode from Wales, and I absolutely loved that.
Yes, that one was really good.
But I read a lot of stuff to do that one. And so I would love to dive into another country's ancestral traditions and have kind of thought about it with Italy a little bit. But Sweden, we do sometimes talk about Sweden on Discord and Scandinavia because several people on there have roots in Scandinavia. So that's maybe something we can do. Talking of Discord, Andrea, do you want to tell the listeners what's going on there at the moment?
Yes, just to give everybody a little window into what's happening. Alison, you did an interview all about medieval ale on the British Food History podcast, which is such a fun podcast. And I know all the Americans, we really enjoy reading about the British food history because our food history is like 300 years long. It's not very long. So it's interesting for us to find some of our roots there. And so that was a really great interview. So if you want to hear Alison talk more about ale, because we can never get you talking about ale enough on this podcast, you do have a really good episode. I think one of our top 5 episodes of all time is the interview where you said, what have we done to beer?
Yeah.
That's a really great episode if anybody wants to hear more about it. And then the interview with, I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Dr. Neil Buttery.
Neil Buttery, that's right. Yeah. So with Dr. Neil Buttery. And then I was also going to shout out Melissa in the Discord. She made chocolate croissants. Like she made them. She said it took 2 days, and she said she hadn't mapped out the timing, and I think she said they baked them at like midnight or something.
Yeah,
so I thought that was really impressive and dedicated. What?
I agree.
And she said the main thing was that they would need more chocolate.
And why not? Exactly. The other thing that I would just want to make a quick mention for before we dive into our content today is our newsletter. If you go to ancestralkitchenpodcast.com, on the top of every page, you'll see a little bar where you can give us details of where we can contact you. And we are putting together a newsletter that will come out regularly with lots of more, kind of just more from us. So if you like us and you want more, then that newsletter will come to your inbox and you can consume us in your inbox as well as in your ears. So do go to our website and pop your details in if you'd like that. Okay, let's go to a break now. If you're into ancestral eating, you'll know that liver is a superfood, full of vitamin A, K, and a whole host of B vitamins, plus many essential minerals. It has an exceptional nutrient profile and is a staple of traditional healthy diets. But it's not always easy to consistently get liver into our lives. Finding a good supply, cooking it so it acts actually tastes good and getting all of our family to eat it. These things can be hard, especially when we're busy or travelling. That's why Andrew and I turn to liver capsules. They give us all the benefits of liver without having to worry about the sourcing, the preparation, or the eating. One Earth Health produces organ capsules from 100% grass-fed New Zealand-raised cattle. As a podcast listener, you can get 15% off your first order and 5% off subsequent orders by using the link in our show notes. And each time you order, you'll also be supporting us to continue making this podcast.
All right. So, Allison, I've been doing some reading, and a health food company in the U.S. put together a research committee to get some data on Americans and their food consumption. This was in August of last year. This is not a scientific study. They provided the details about how they got all of their respondents, and it wasn't, a statistical survey type thing. It was just, people who came to their website or people that they sent something to. But it was 2,000 people. And if we take the results to be roughly representative of Americans, it does represent the conversations I have with people. And I was interested to know if, after I read this to you, if you could tell me if it's similar in the UK. Or even in Italy, if you remember from there, if the discussions came up there. So the top barrier to eating what people consider a healthier diet, which they did not define, includes it being too expensive. 41% of people complained of that. Not having enough time to make the meals. 26% brought this up as an issue. And finding it difficult to locate the healthy ingredients. This was 19%. And then respondents also mentioned that when they didn't have time, they would eat sandwiches, fast food, and microwavable dinners. Which, sandwiches can be a good thing, but the other ones are problems. And
sandwiches can be a bad thing too.
Yeah, well, it can be kind of like you're making me think of Sally Fallon saying salads are killing America.
Yeah.
Sandwiches could do the same thing. Now, sandwiches could be really great, but they could also be scary. Convenience was a huge problem for Americans. 74% said they would be interested in eating better food if it were more convenient. And almost everybody reported that eating healthy was important to them. But 19% of people said they were still going to fast food at least once a day.
Oh my gosh, once a day.
Yeah. So that tells me not that people don't care or whatever, but that they're hungry, they're desperate, they don't have the skills and the tools, they're being told they can't afford it, all sorts of things. And they feel that they have no choice. That literally breaks my heart, Allison. And I designed this episode today to speak to this specifically. So first I want you to tell me, is this just an American problem or are you seeing it overseas?
No, absolutely not.
Oh.
It's not just an American problem. In the UK, I think all of the things that I hear and see, people say to me, I can't afford it. How do you eat like this on this budget? How can I afford it? It's so difficult. I think time is also a problem, particularly for people with children, mums who are perhaps working and they've got kids at home and they're trying to look after a household. Time is definitely an issue too, but the biggest issue by far is budget for people. And I think, that's been reflected in our journey. Rob and I, the biggest things we've had to work with and had to work around have been financial and time resources for sure. So yeah, it's exactly the same here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I am depressed now. So thanks for telling me this is a global problem. Okay. So that's encouraging. Well, Allison, I guess our podcast is in the right place at the right time, because I feel like
Yeah.
these things, I could almost even divide our podcast episodes up and say, if your barrier is too expensive, 41% of respondents, then here, listen to these 10 episodes. If you don't have enough time, 26% of respondents, listen to these episodes. So we have some episodes that speak specifically to this, but this is not something that we can discuss too much because it is a very real problem. And I know here in the US, we have this inflation thing going on, and everybody is, food costs are taking, without changing what people are eating, the food costs are consuming a larger and larger portion of people's budget. That's a problem, because then they're also feeling the weight of, I should be eating something else, but I already can't even afford what we've been eating. So that's a big problem. I feel that our lifestyle, the way our lifestyle is kind of expected to be nowadays, with doing lots of things, going lots of places, being online, etc., watching shows and things like that, is
Absolutely.
I think it's contributing to not having time. And you actually, speaking of, there's an episode called Why I Gave Away My iPhone, and you talked about how it was consuming so much of your time that you got rid of it. And that was one of the things that helped you to have more time to cook. And before everybody turns us off on their iPhone that they're listening to us on, then maybe you don't have to get rid of your iPhone. Maybe you do, but maybe you don't, and you just need to set timers and spend less time on it. I don't know.
I think that the word that you used a few minutes ago the most often in that survey was the word convenience. And I think what you've just spoken to with expectations and pace and the way we live these days, we kind of expect convenience. We need convenience.
You're right, Alison.
We're living in this kind of world where we are doing so many things and we are bringing stuff in and we want to have stuff delivered to us. Amazon is an example of it. That's what I just thought of, that we want something, we get it, it's delivered to us. Convenience.
You're right.
And we kind of expect. And I'm sure you're going to talk in a minute about how really, for most of our history, convenience and food, they didn't really go together. So I wanted to that word convenience was just sticking in my head there where you were talking. I was thinking, yes.
I think that's a great point for you to make, Alison. And it was going to be a thread that will run throughout this entire episode, which is that convenience is, as you said, an expectation that we have, but it's not necessarily a realistic one. Which there are ways we can make things be convenient. Like I described that breakfast I had, which took under 5 minutes to prepare. I had to slice bread, I had to heat the rillettes, and everything else just scooped onto a plate. But that was, of course, the result of, having done the work before. So it's convenient now, but I put the time in earlier. And that I think is an aspect that is great to unravel as people immerse themselves into the ancestral food lifestyle for longer and longer. You start to get those compounding benefits that don't exist if you just try to eat ancestral for one day or for a week or something, which is what most journalists do when they try to write those terrible articles about how unrealistic it is. All right. So we don't have a lot of skills nowadays, and that is something we need to learn. And it is something that adults in a fully functioning, absolutely illiterate society once all knew. It was just culturally expected. And the supermarkets episode that we just put out, Alison, speaks directly into the struggle that many people have to find the ethical and good ingredients. So if we're talking about finding ingredients, that is a place to go.
Yeah, go listen to that one.
Today, I want to focus on the 41% complaint, which is too expensive.
Okay, good.
So here we go. So we've got the rising cost of food all over the place. We're being told it's too expensive for you to eat healthy. And then we see these really glamorous health food stores that have really high-priced foods, and we think that's not for me. I have to stay at this other store. Already falling into the lineup fallacy that you have to stay at a store, and then we just try not to think about it because it's stressful, and we have too many other stressful things to think about, and we have bills coming due and mortgages to pay and children that need their diapers changed, and it's a lot. So I wanted to bring in a three-pronged answer to this problem first. And then, Allison, I want to literally talk about actual food recipes, dishes, meals,
I'm excited about this.
prices, comparisons. So the first response I have to the food being too expensive is that food has always been a huge and expensive portion of human energy expenditure. So it is probably the expenditure in the U.S. by most stats that I could find second to housing. So it's pretty high. Yes. Except it might actually be third after healthcare expenses. It depends on how you slice the numbers. But those three are certainly up there. And it has always been in history. You and I have spent, we are not historians, but we have spent a fair amount of time reading about people, and your oat research, whenever you wax eloquent on that, is a great example of this, that people in many cultures up until about 100 years ago, aka the advent of the supermarket, spent the majority of their time getting food or getting food for their domestic animals. So this includes farming labor, shepherding, herding, hunting, foraging, gardening, things like that. And then people in exclusive occupations like a priest or a traveling bard or shope, they were often given food as part of their tribal inheritance. Like a great example in the Bible is the Levites in the tribes of Israel who were told, you don't get a bunch of stuff, but people are going to have to basically take care of you. That's part of their job. That freed them up from getting food all day so that they could spend time, spiritually tending to their people. So we have, I think, with the first 100 years of supermarkets, we got very accustomed to food being a smaller percentage of our budget. And then with supermarkets, a bunch of other luxuries and requirements that you're supposed to spend your money on blossomed to take the place of the expenses that you would have once had on your time. So we have things like TV, subscriptions, entertainment. That's like a huge expenditure in the US anyways. Lots of really expensive insurances that you have to buy, clothes that you have to buy constantly, new, they're not repaired. But I will reassure everyone that everyone has pretty much always had to pay taxes. So that's always been a problem. Allison, I wanted to ask you, for you, is food, I know for us it is food a significant portion of your budget?
Big, yes. I mean, we spend so much of the income that we have on food. We, listeners who've been with us for a while know that Rob and I don't have a car. We don't have a TV. We don't have any subscriptions to any kind of entertainment. We have the cheapest phone packages you could possibly have. Both of us have old phones. We don't eat out. Maybe we eat out twice a year, perhaps. We don't really go on holidays. We don't, spend the weekend traveling to different places and doing stuff. That's not what we do with our money. Our money goes into buying good food, feeding ourselves well, and bringing that energy to the farmers who we care about, to the soil, and to our plates and the kitchen, which brings so much kind of wholeness and joy into our lives. But yes, I mean, an absolutely significant portion of our budget. We still do pay a bit more for housing, like you said, but by far the next biggest expense in our life is food. The rest of our expenses pale into insignificance with it. And it's not like we've got a big budget. We've always been a family who, focus on being happy and healthy and creative, not in going out and earning. Neither of us have worked for a corporate company or for anyone other than ourselves for 15 years, maybe even more. So it's not like we've got a lot of money coming in and we're just, portioning out a part of it to food. The bit that we do spend on food is always tight. It's always a conscious choice, which is not easy. And the more that I do it and the more I feel like I'm getting benefits from it and the more I realise it's in alignment with what I believe in, the more it's a no-brainer. But still, it's every month, right? This is a situation we're in. It's not an easy choice, but it is very definitely a significant portion of our budget, yeah.
So what I'm also hearing you say, Alison, is that if you wanted the things like expensive phone packages or more TV stuff or something, you'd have to, if you wanted to keep eating the way you either have to, I don't think you could actually eat cheaper, to be honest, which I think I'll get to when we get in here, when we discuss this. But you would have to decide, we're going to work a lot more so that we can watch Netflix or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just stabbing an idea out there.
And that's back to lifestyle, what you were saying earlier on, you know?
Yeah. So you've set your expectations of how you'll spend your time. And you and Rob have decided, instead of buying a subscription, I will read out loud. And Alison and Gabe will listen. And that's your entertainment, which is awesome.
That's my subscription.
Subscribe to Rob.
He reads.
Rob Plus. Okay. Thank you, Alison. The second point I wanted to make about the food and expensiveness is that we will spend the money on our health somewhere. It will either be preventative medicine in the form of food, or a remedial care, or a chronic sick care. And what I mean by that is Joel Salatin pulled these statistics. I'm not sure what year he pulled them, but I went and did some research and I found that the stats from last year were almost identical. So whenever he pulled this from, it's pretty close. He said 40 years ago, Americans spent 18% of their income on food and 8% of their income on healthcare. 40 years later, Americans now spend 18% of their income on healthcare and 8% of their income on food. The statistics I found only varied in that they said it's 9% of the income on food. So it was really close.
I can't understand that 8%. If I think in my head roughly on our budget, I mean, we spend way more than 8% of our income on food. Way more. Yes. I don't know how. I'd have to eat the most rubbish food possible to spend 8% of my income on food.
So you aren't though. So you don't know what you would feel like if you were eating food that, you aren't saying, I'm going to eat this onion because I have a headache. That's not what we mean by food as medicine. What we mean is you're eating the food that's keeping you above the line of wellness so that your body, for the most part, has the tools it needs to keep ticking away and to feel good. If you ate bad foods, you'd start sliding so far below that line of wellness, you would need somebody to help you. Like you'd say, oh, I'm so depressed, you're not getting any serotonin, your gut isn't functioning, but you don't know that. So you say, I'm really depressed and unhappy, please help me. And there's therapies for that, or you might say, my skin is just like dry and breaking out constantly. I don't know what to do. So there's therapies you can take for that. There's any variety of things that could happen, but we don't always know. It's not like I ate a cookie and then I had depression. Like that's not really how it works. It's just an organism, that's your body, being consistently kind of slid off the edge of being harmonized. And the more it gets pushed, the more it starts to tilt. And then the more uncomfortable you are. And then it's really hard to point to exactly where it began. Yeah. But I am very sympathetic to this situation. And I do not think if you're spending 18% of your income on healthcare, you cannot today also start spending 18% of your income on food, because there's an obvious problem there in that you'll run out of percents. So I think the shift, if we can accept that the shift can be gradual, perhaps this year you will just say, for the sake of numbers, you spent 18% of your income on healthcare and 8% of your income on food. And then next year, maybe it was 17% of your income on healthcare and 9% on food. You could, as you eat better, a lot of problems do start to resolve, if you will. But you can hopefully slowly shift the ratio. Alison, could you mention a time that I have specifically in mind when you used food to actually address a healthcare need you had?
Yeah, I guess the biggest one we've already talked about on the podcast back in an episode on fertility.
Yeah.
And that was the fact that I was not menstruating at all and I wanted to have a child. And I went to the doctor and the doctor said, you won't get pregnant unless you take medicine. And I decided that I didn't agree with that. And so I changed what I was eating. I did lots of research and I brought my menstrual cycle back and I had Gabriel. And I mean, all of that, I'm using food to address that desire and that need in my life to heal me, rather than going and saying to someone, okay, give me your drugs and we'll see whether that works and deal with the consequences of that as well. So that's a big example, but there have been so many other examples in my life of that happening to me or with Rob or with Gabriel. You know, we always turn to food first, and medicine last, frankly.
Right. Okay. That is helpful to hear. My third response to the approach of the food being expensive is to eat simpler, more common food. And we, thanks to supermarkets and the internet, have all been cultivating the taste of French nobles when we're actually peasants.
Yeah.
So we have been raised and trained to like fussy, detailed dishes or expensive ingredients that were once reserved for holidays, which are now commonplace everyday foods, you know, sweets that turn up all the time when they would have only been on a feast day or something. And we have what I call Pinterest appetites, where we want different, unique, exciting, colorful, splashy dishes for every meal.
Yeah.
And then instead of just beating the same bread recipe over and over and over until you know it backwards and forwards and it works for you, we keep jumping for the Instagram trick, which is, this is the only bread recipe you'll ever need. Then the next day, a new pop-up with a better picture, the best sandwich bread. Then the next day, a better picture and a new pop-up, this bread will save your soul. So what we're
panicking already.
I know. Just writing that down it's stressing me out. But that is where I think we need to learn the diligent repetition on the simple and the boring and the commonplace. And
I wanted to just bring up something that you said, two things actually. It's really interesting that you talked about French nobles, because when the Norman French invaded the UK, I've done this research in my book recently, there was something called the oat bread line, where they were looking around where to build their castles, and they didn't want to go further north than this oat bread line, which is the line where wheat couldn't be grown.
Wow.
And oats had to be grown instead due to the weather and geography. And so they would only build their castles where they could grow and harvest wheat. They wouldn't build their castles up north.
Hilarious.
Because they ate oats there. The peasants ate oats there. And it's quite funny that you said French nobles, because that actually happens. You know, everyone else there was eating oats, like 3 meals a day, virtually. But the French nobles didn't want to know. The other thing that I was going to say was about Italy, because you're talking about, we have these feast foods all the time these days, and feast foods don't really have a meaning anymore. I, did a lot of research when I was in Italy into their carnival, and how the carnival was a time where they ate the good things, you know. They actually had meat, they actually had treats, they had good things, because most of the time they were eating the same simple dishes, like you said. But it's interesting, watching Gabriel go to the Steiner school that he did in Italy when we were there, because they're celebrating carnival, so they're getting dressed up and they're doing nice things for it. But they were eating foods that were available to eat every day. So they're celebrating carnival, and Italy celebrates carnival with sweet treats and things in packets. But those things are eaten every day in Italy too. There are still a few foods that, we only make this bun on carnival, really. But really, the idea of it was, wow, we can actually feast now. But the kids are eating sweet things all the time, all year, so there's no different. They're just eating more of them in carnival, and that's just so not the point. The point of that was, there was that short period of time where the fat of the land was able to be celebrated. And then the rest of the year, it was what you're talking about, simple food, repeated. and grown close to home. I just had those two.
I think those are great
thoughts
connections
in my head when you were talking.
Yeah, those are really great relations to make there, Allison. Science of relations. If you want to hear more about Allison and I talking about how simple food, which has good ingredients, is quite delicious, you could jump to episode 100. We talked about what is ancestral food, and we talked about the simplicity of things. So, Allison, if we still have time left today, then I want to talk about some food.
We are taking quite a while. I'm a bit nervous.
So when it comes to a recipe book, I will throw out there that the one I want to talk about today is Nourishing Traditions. It is the answer to the rising cost of food. Peasant food is pleasant food, I like to say. And there is a quote from G.K. Chesterton in Nourishing Traditions, and she quotes him as saying, "There is more simplicity in the man who eats caviar on impulse than in the man who eats grape nuts on principle." Kind of like that.
I don't remember that one. There's so many beautiful things in Nourishing Traditions. I have it on my lap right now. And I think what we want to get across in this episode is that Nourishing Traditions can be so overwhelming. But it doesn't need to be overwhelming. You don't have to make everything in the book. I have not made everything in the book. I have not even made half of the things in this book. But this book inspires me all the time. Each recipe is like a sort of a capsule, an idea that you can take and go, okay, well, I could use this method. I could add this ingredient in here. Or I haven't got liver, I've got heart, or I've got kidney instead. And there are things you can just sub in and sub out and use it as a guide to help you construct your own recipes.
Yes.
What you have in your cupboards, in your fridge, or what you have in the market around you, depending on what season it is, and where you live.
She'll say that often. She'll say kamut or spelt or wheat or rye or, so you kind of get the, she can't say that in every ingredient, but you get the idea. And I agree with that, Allison. And I'd say, buy things bulk if you can, because I'm going to talk about that when we get to the recipes. That'll drive your cost down quite a lot. My best tip for getting started with Nourishing Traditions is, if you don't know where to begin with the book, just go to the index on page 651 and just start reading the titles of the recipes. And as soon as you see something that sounds good, go to that page and see if it has ingredients you have access to and if it's a process you'd like to learn. I can spend just 1 minute in the index and get a list of 40 titles of things I'd like to make. Hey, you washing the dishes. Been there. You've heard Allison and I talk over and over about her love of rye sourdough bread. Well, I might actually call it an obsession, but that's neither here nor there. Now you can make Allison's rye sourdough in your own kitchen with her as your teacher. And she's a really good teacher. Rye is economical, it's delicious, and full of nutrients and low in gluten. There's a reason why it has been a darling of bread bakers for centuries. Make it into sourdough, as Allison will show you in her course, Rye Sourdough Bread, Mastering the Basics. And you've got an amazing, tasty, and nutritious staple in your kitchen. It's traditional and it's nutritional. In this course, you'll learn everything there is to know about how she creates and maintains her rye sourdough starter, all about whole grain sourdough rye, including the key differences between baking with rye and wheat, how to make 2 loaves, an everyday rye sandwich bread, and a delicious Russian-style dark rye loaf, and what to do with your sourdough discard, including video walkthroughs for sourdough pancakes and a tasty, sweet, spiced cake. Head to www.ancestralkitchen.com/rye. So eating cheaply is not necessarily always the goal of the way you and I eat, Allison, as I think we've discussed. But it is actually possible at times. And that is one way, being more, getting beans in bulk and driving the cost down there is one way that you can then allocate more of your grocery dollar into a more expensive thing like meat. And then when you're choosing meat, choosing something that either you have access to at a great sort of like raising meat if you can, or choosing the organ meats, because like you said, the heart earlier is cheaper. So then you can keep driving your cost down to make it reasonable. The main ingredient is your creative and interesting brain. So I have a document, Allison, that I made after I made all these notes. I just kind of copied out the recipe name and page number and the price comparisons if I had it for each of these recipes. And I'm going to drop that in the download section for the patrons. So if you want all these recipes in one list, jump on to ancestralkitchenpodcast.com, become a supporter, the companionship level or above, and this and up bunch of other stuff will be there for you. So first, Alison,
there's so much I just want to say there's so much information here that it's worth getting that, because you've done tons of research on, recipes that you love in Nourishing Traditions, how much it costs to buy it in the store. Yeah. And you have so many ideas of how you can drive that cost down and what you could use instead. So having a kind of a cheat sheet that can help you is really beneficial.
And I cannot read everything that, like, I showed my work, if you will, like how much every ounce of everything cost, but I'm not going to read all that on air because it would feel like a 5-hour episode. So I'm going to share for each of these that I have the calculations. I'm going to share the cost, the total cost. But I'm not going to read each item. So Allison, I originally just wanted to write an episode where we had 10 recipes from Nourishing Traditions that were really easy, straightforward ones people could get started with right away. Then I thought it would be nice if I could show how much more expensive they were than buying it from the store. But that is not what the math was showing me. Every single recipe I pulled out, I was finding that it was cheaper to make an organic ancestral version than to buy the cheapest version at the grocery store here, which is called Walmart, which is about the cheapest grocery store you can find. For one or two things, I started comparing Whole Foods, and then I was like, forget about that. That's like just so unreasonable. But I kept finding recipe after recipe, and Leah was here when I was writing these notes, and I kept trying to find one that would be more expensive, and I was starting to get frustrated. So I got 10 recipes here that are cheaper to make, and then I found I have 5 recipes that you and I both really like that I don't know what you'd compare them to, so I can't say if they're cheaper or not. And then there's 6 recipes that are more expensive to make, but some of them are barely more expensive, but I'm still not putting them in the list of the 10 cheaper ones. But I was shocked, Allison, by what I found, because
I'm shocked reading your notes.
Yeah. So Basic Muffins is a recipe on page 482 of Nourishing Traditions. It makes 16 muffins and an organic ancestral homemade batch of these 16 muffins with organic wheat berries and raw milk, and I put expensive eggs and grass-fed butter, all of these things. That recipe would cost you $4.66 to make, assuming, this is where, Allison, I want to talk about bringing price down, which I'll mention multiple times, that you bought your organic wheat berries in bulk. So I know that our eggs they're cheaper than some places in the nation, and they're more expensive than some places. But I can bring my overall cost down by not buying expensive flour at Whole Foods, but I buy a huge bag of organic wheat berries. I know you do the same with your rye. I buy the huge bag, and that drives the per ounce cost down so significantly that it helps me to have a little more to allocate towards the eggs, but then the overall cost is still lower. If you were to buy 16 pre-made, not from the bakery, but plastic packaged conventional industrial muffins from Walmart, and the star rating that these got was 2 stars, and the review said very dry and crumbly with no taste of blueberry flavor, it would cost you $4.95. So,
and how much were the original ones again? The ones that we made?
$4.66.
Okay.
So the organic and ancestral ones, they're soaked, they're fermented, they're very high in protein. They've got grass-fed butter, maple syrup full of minerals. They've got the choline from the egg, protein from the egg, saturated fat. They've got Redmond real salt, so you're getting your mineral dose. And then the ones from so they're actually a medicinal food. And then the ones from the grocery store, which cost marginally more, but still more, I will point out, actually could send you into like a arthritis flare or like a spiral, not good for your health. So,
and those ones made at home are going to make your house smell amazing and your kids love you.
Yeah, that's true. Whatever makes our kids love us, we got to do.
Yeah.
All right. So that's a breakfast option. Breakfast porridge is another one, page 455. And when you look at the notes for this, you'll see that I put in parentheses after each item a couple ingredients that were the dominant ingredients from each recipe, because from there you can kind of at a glance know, yeah, I have access to oats, that's an option, or no, oats aren't even in my, wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So this one kind of shocked me because I thought that the grocery store, it's Quaker Oats as the competition, Allison. I thought it would be cheaper. So when you're buying your oats in bulk, which is what I listed here, then the price per ounce goes down insanely. And if you just make the recipe as Sally Fallon has written it, organic, ancestral, fermented, homemade oats porridge breakfast thing costs you $1.10. And that's including if you put in half a stick of butter. And the conventional, commercial, packaged store cost Quaker Oats, instant oats, maple and brown sugar flavor, which, by the way, has no maple or brown sugar in it. It just has the flavor of it. Isn't that tricky? So there's no minerals. The entire, it's $2.87.
Okay.
So it's
that's a big difference.
over double. But it's the cheap version, right? And you're being told, the organic fermented oats, that's too much for you. You just have to eat the Quaker
And those oats aren't fermented from Quaker. I mean,
no.
They've been extra processed and not fermented.
We don't want to know what happened to those oats.
No. I do.
Yeah, you do. But so you can make that breakfast for $1. And it would feed, that serving that I put there feeds me and all 4 of my kids for breakfast.
If you liked rye and you wanted to flake your own rye or use rye, cracked rye is substantially cheaper than oats, even though oats aren't that expensive. So if you bought rye berries in bulk, you could make that for even cheaper than that.
Yep. You could use whatever grain you have access to at the best price. Some people live close to a mill that raises a certain type of grain. So you could roll kamut or spelt if you had a roller like Allison, like you have. That's an option. Or you could just use a coarsely cracked rye. You can use whole teff. You could make this with ground corn. There's a lot of ways you can do it. So now, if you had made that and you didn't finish it, then the next day you can make fried mush. Page 457. This is leftover porridge, whatever your porridge may be, and eggs. I couldn't figure out anything to compare this to. And the cost is leftover oats plus whatever the cost of eggs is. So the theme of ancestral food is no waste. And that is one way that you'll save money is a friend of mine, Naomi, made a great point the other day. She said she just didn't know what to have for dinner. She was kind of desperate. She had made bone broth a couple days prior, and it was about to go bad, she felt. And so she thought, I could just ask my husband to get a pizza. But then she thought, then the next day, everybody's like upset because they ate something that upset their tummies. And she thought, what would a peasant do? Which I love that line of thinking. And she thought, a peasant would not waste this broth. And she made a delicious dinner with her broth. So that has to go on the bottom line of food, because we know, Allison, and you talked about this with Sir Patrick Holden in an earlier interview, that 50% of food, human edible food, is thrown away in the US and similar in the UK. And if we can stop throwing away food, that makes a big difference on your budget.
And that is linked directly to cooking it yourself, because those muffins you were talking about, if you'd made 16 muffins, you wouldn't be throwing any of them away.
No.
But if you bought those store ones that are a bit dry before they've even been opened and you left them a while, you'd feel less bothered about throwing one away than you would throwing away something you've made.
You would be thinking in your head, these were cheap, but they actually were more expensive, which is what's wild. Alison, could you talk about kasha?
Yeah, of course. And we have talked about this briefly on a previous episode, which is number 34, where we shared our favourite Nourishing Traditions recipes. So you can go back and listen to that one as well. And this is a wonderful dish, and I absolutely love it. It's on page 464 in Nourishing Traditions. And it's basically really simple ingredients: buckwheat, the groats, so you don't have to be grinding anything, egg, broth, butter and seasoning. So it's a great way to use up broth that you've got in the fridge, like you were just talking about. And it's really rich because of the butter, and you've got the egg in there, which is a economical protein, and you can season it with whatever you want. In the recipe in Nourishing Traditions, she talks about sprouting your buckwheat first and then ovening it. But you could also make it with buckwheat that you just put in the cast iron pan and roast and don't sprout. I've done it with both.
I did not realize
Both taste really good.
Oh.
So that's one of my go-tos in Nourishing Traditions, and I think it's good value for money, particularly if you buy the buckwheat in bulk, like you've been saying.
Well, let's find out, Alison, because I did the math.
Open the box.
So if you wanted to make this organic, bone broth, like every ingredient counted organic, bone broth that you had to make. And I was brutal in my calculations, Alison, in that I had our little character here buying bones for broth. But you and I both know that we use leftover bones that, after you had the meal off the meat, the bones that normally people are throwing away. So I actually calculated if you were buying organic bones and making broth. So for this protein and saturated fat rich meal, 3 cups volume recipe, it would cost you $3.94. I went to Walmart, and if you bought their buckwheat boil-in bag, which apparently is a thing, it would cost, for the pack of 2, $13.98.
Oh my gosh.
So it's a big difference.
Wow.
That is the convenience factor, because you're boiling it in the bag, which I know is
and that doesn't even
triggering us.
include the other ingredients.
That's without broth. You don't have broth in that. You don't have egg in that. You don't have butter in that. If we added those things in, the cost would go up even more. But I was assuming in this instance that you were just going for the convenience and you don't care about the nutrition. So
yeah,
and you're boiling it in the bag. So how are you supposed to add the egg, anyways? It's in a bag.
Yeah. I used to boil in the bag very, 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 very long time ago, and now I think, oh God,
what was I doing?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's some breakfast ideas. Here's some lunch ideas that I'll throw down real quick. Dilled potato salad. This is one that I pulled up when I was trying to find something that would definitely cost more than making at home. It does cost more than making it or than buying from the store, but it barely cost more, and I was shocked. I thought it was going to be double the cost at least. So if you made the dilled potato salad as written in Sally Fallon's book with an expensive, no seed oil, pre-made mayonnaise and all organic ingredients, and I priced the local potatoes that we can buy from our farm here for a 2-pound bowl of organic, seed oil-free, ancestrally prepared herbed dilled salad, it would cost $6.95. For the Walmart conventional potato salad with 1 bazillion ingredients and mostly canola oil, $5.14.
And your $6.95 was based on buying a bottle of organic mayonnaise, correct?
Right, but I only calculated the percentage that you would use from the mayonnaise.
Well, that's interesting though, because if you made the mayonnaise yourself.
So of the $6.95, $3.75 of that was the mayo. So the mayonnaise was the most expensive part. So yes, like you say, I save fat and make, like with fat that people pour into cans and throw in the trash can, I make that into mayo. Now you still have to buy the eggs to go with that, so that you still have a cost, but it would certainly drive the price down quite a bit.
Yeah.
How about hummus? This is another one, Allison, that I pulled up. I was like, definitely making homemade hummus. It's going to be cheaper from the store. False. Hummus, page 174. Did I say the dilled potato salad was page 190? Hummus on page 174. Yeah, you did,
because I looked for it.
Good. So with this hummus, if you wanted to make a 16-ounce batch of organic soaked ancestral hummus with local garlic that I assume you had to buy, but if you listen to Megan's interview, you'll be growing garlic.
Grow it.
And with tahini, which we make in our Vitamix. We buy the big bag of sesame seeds from Azure and make tahini.
Okay.
Your most expensive ingredient is the lemon juice. So we're buying organic, not from concentrate lemon juice because, of course, you know, lemon juice has great medicinal benefits for your body, but not if it's a nasty one. The cost for the 16-ounce batch is $2.98. The very cheapest conventional hummus I could find at Walmart for 16-ounce costs $4.59. Then if you
what's in it either.
No, you don't. If you want to dip carrots, organic carrots from our local farm, $1.46 for a pound, and the conventional bagged baby carrots came in a little bit lower at $1.32 a pound, but they barely were lower than the organic local carrots, which are delicious, and the baby carrots are disgusting. Allison, could you talk about Indian-style pancakes or dosas, which can be found on page 510?
Yeah, this is a recipe that I turn to a lot in Nourishing Traditions. It's really simple to make because it's just lentils and brown rice. You leave it to ferment overnight, and then you fry up the resulting fermented batter in ideally the cast iron pan, which I often like to do with ghee because that's kind of authentic. But sometimes I've done it in lard or tallow. And they are really simple to make. You know, you can just have the cast iron pan on and be frying them while you're doing other things in the kitchen. You don't have to pay any attention to the batter while it's fermenting. And then you can either jazz them up with kind of a, you know, Indian style salad, perhaps with fresh coriander leaves and onion and nigella seeds, or with some sort of chutney, one of your ferments. You can use them as wraps. You can put some lentils or cooked food in them, fold them over, and that's your carbohydrate kind of portion for the meal. You can serve them to friends. You can put them in the fridge and keep them. You can freeze them and reheat them. They're just really wonderful. You can use them to wrap things, like a ground meat dish, wrap it up in a dosa, freeze it, and then you've got kind of like a burrito sort of thing you could take out and heat up again. They're really simple and really, really lovely.
The cost for 20 of those ancestrally prepared with buying the bulk cheapest organic brown rice Azure offers is $5.45. And over half of that was the ghee that I calculated.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
So you could use it. Yeah, you could use a cheaper fat, like you said.
Yeah.
Salmon spread, page 164. Another recipe I picked because I thought definitely it's going to be more expensive to make this with line-caught ethical salmon and organic dairy. I was wrong. Total cost for 2 cups of organic, sustainable, preservative-free spread, totally packed with nutrition, omegas, saturated fats, all the things we love, $6.54. If you were to buy the cheapest priced salmon spread that I could find, which was Philadelphia brand, 16 ounces would cost $9.53. So it's significantly more. And I can tell you, I haven't had their salmon spread, but I've had another spread from them, and it was leaving much to be desired. So,
and that surprises me because I always kind of look at canned salmon, particularly one that's sustainable, and think, oh, it's too expensive.
I know. That's why I did the math. I was like, oh, this will break the budget.
Yeah. Wow.
But you couldn't go to Walmart and get it cheaper. So look at that. That just blows my mind. Okay. The last thing I want to say here, and then we're going to cut to a break, is sourdough bread, page 490. You're going to be buying bulk wheat berries and grinding them, because this is what we have learned on the podcast, the most nutritious way to have your grains and also the cheapest. The cost of organic, ancestral, fresh sourdough bread, a recipe that makes 5 to 6 loaves, so we will say 5 loaves. The total cost for this big batch is $2.86, which comes out to 57 cents a loaf. The cheapest conventional loaf I could find at Walmart, which doesn't look like something most people would want to eat. It looked very fluffy and white, was $1.48 a loaf. So almost 3 times as much. And if you...
Sourdough is not expensive.
No, it's not. Even if, Allison, that's if you used wheat, which is the cheapest grain I could find, because I'm assuming we're going for full budget buster here. But if you were even using a slightly more expensive grain, it would still beat the cheapest conventional loaf. And sourdough bread, as we know, has the post-para probiotics. It has protein. It has comfort. It has a great aroma. It's a great vehicle for lard or butter. And if you have sourdough bread, then you can have varieties of sandwiches, spreads, cheese sauce, broth, dip, kraut and dip, soup and dip, cooked meat and gravy over bread, egg on bread, etc., etc. And then you have stale scraps for meatballs and meatloaf and breakfast casserole.
Croutons,
So, Allison, let's talk about some dinner ideas in the next section.
Okay.
So, here's some dinner ideas that use the idea of cooking from scratch. So the idea is to eat a higher quality meal that still costs less overall. It is possible with strategy and planning, but the planning and effort is the part that makes you the money. What we pay grocery stores to do is value add our foods. We actually do eat processed foods. You and I, Allison, we just process it ourselves. And that is ancestral principle. So you don't have to change everything in your house to being from scratch right away. Look at what you buy a lot of at the grocery store and start by switching that. So a friend told me that she uses 10 cans of beans a week. So I'm going to use that as my example for the next item. Basic beans recipe, page 496. The thought process I had here was, if you could buy dried beans, how would that compare to buying canned beans? If you can get these organic, ethically raised beans, and I'm using Azure as an example again because it's the easiest one for me to calculate, but you could also calculate beans at any place around you. And Azure does actually very much encourage people to buy whatever they can locally and then use Azure to source what they cannot get locally, because they understand that without the small farms, there's no food. So your organic, ancestral, homemade cost of the equivalent of 10 cans of beans a week, which you could make and can these beans. But in truth, Allison, if you know you're going to use 10 cans of beans a week, you could cook a batch of beans and then just use it from the fridge over the week. You don't really have to can it. It would cost you $6.10 for your beans. If you were buying conventional, canned, non-organic, the cheapest beans that I could find at Walmart, the same cost would be $9.10.
And the thing about the beans is it's like the doses. You don't have to do much on time. You just got to soak them and leave them, and then you're getting better nutrition from them because they've been kind of soaked and probably slightly fermented, depending on how long you leave it for. And then you just cook them, and you don't have to be doing anything while you're cooking them. It's just that forethought, that planning. Right, I'm going to want beans tomorrow. So you can just put it in your diary like once a week until you get into the habit. Soak all the beans Sunday night, cook them up Monday, and then you've got a stash in the fridge that you can eat separately or fry, put in things, mix in with ground meat to make it go further. Loads of different things.
And if you started to get to the end of the week and you realized you weren't going to finish them, you actually can freeze them. You could just drop them in a container in the freezer and then pull them out and throw them in burritos one day. There's other benefits, Allison, that come that are not enumerated here in this price that I showed for the beans. So for instance, when we buy beans in a 25-pound sack from Azure, and then we pour it into a 5-gallon bucket that I've been using for almost 16 years. Mm-hmm. So it's one container, and then the brown bag is great for filling with paper scraps, and then we bring it down here and it is used to start fires. So if I was buying... And you could also, we've used them, to lay in our garden, the paper sacks from beans or wheat, to cover for weeds and things like that. You can use the paper sacks for a lot of things. But if I was buying these beans in cans, or even if I was buying the little plastic bags at the grocery store, which cost an insane price now that I'm used to the bulk prices of things, you would have a lot more trash to deal with.
Yeah.
I also want to note that when you're buying these organically raised beans and soaking them and preparing them in this way, you not only are avoiding any possible BPA exposure from cans, which is a potential problem, you're also making them more digestible so your family doesn't have issues with their tummies, and you're not contributing to the bottom line of glyphosate exposure in your family. So not only are you saving money by buying a cheaper bean, but you're also contributing to your wellness and not to the bottom line of chronic illness. And by the way, Allison, if she was going to buy the beans at Whole Foods and try to get a similar, like an organic bean, do you want me to tell you how much it would cost? This is why people say they can't eat ancestral food, because they think they have to go here. And they're not wrong about the beans would cost $35.70 if she bought the cheapest ones.
God, you're joking.
I know. That's why I did that. And I was like, I am not doing this for every recipe. I'm just going to get mad. So
Gosh, being a healthy vegan is expensive, isn't it?
I guess so. When you have to ship everything in from out of country. A bean forward menu that is a frugal type of menu that I often shared with my Kenyan neighbors. They would make a homemade chapati, or you could do a tortilla, but chapati basically being, your organic wheat berries. And then some people just use water and yeast. Some people use milk. Some people, different ingredients. Cooked beans or mashed beans that we just talked about. And then a side of kraut or cortito and some sauteed and salted greens. It's a very simple menu. And very, very inexpensive. And if you budgeted for that one night a week, then it's delicious and wouldn't get too boring. And then, as I'll make the point later, then you have a few dollars saved towards a nice piece of meat for another menu.
Do you love oats? Want to try your hand at a traditional Scottish oat fermentation? Suans is just that. It was made in Scotland for centuries and will give you both a creamy, easy-to-digest porridge and a tangy probiotic drink. My video course, Suans, the Scottish Oat Ferment, over at the Fermentation School, will guide you through everything you need to know to create these two ancestral foods in your own kitchen, no matter what equipment you have. Head to ancestralkitchen.com/Suans, ancestralkitchen.com/Suans, SOWANS, or click the link in the show notes to get a 10% discount automatically applied.
Allison, could you talk about your dirty rice recipe?
Yeah. Okay, so this is on page 466 in Nourishing Traditions, and it's one of those wonderful things in Nourishing Traditions where there's just a couple of lines after one of the recipes, and it's a whole nother dish. You're like, oh, wow, okay. It's just basically brown rice cooked, and very often I do it in stock. Sometimes I do it with white rice as well, and she's got some flavourings in there, which sometimes we put in, sometimes we don't, switch them up. And then just before the end, you get your liver, whichever flavour liver you want, if you're chicken, if you're just starting on liver and want something milder, or beef, if you love the flavour of beef liver. And she says in the book you can grate it. I very rarely have it frozen. So I just chopping it up beforehand, usually using a pair of scissors because it's easier than trying to fight with a knife and liver squealing around the chopping board. And I just literally cut my liver into my rice a few minutes before I want to eat and then stir it around. Sometimes I put peas in there and then serve it up. It's so simple.
Well, this recipe, I feel like I cheated this because the organic version you just described is actually more expensive. But it's hard to compare it to the grocery store one because the grocery store one I had you make from a box has no broth. And broth is the most expensive part of this recipe at a whopping $2.42 for a quart. And that, if you were to say that you weren't going to, expense your broth, your price would drop quite a bit. The organic and local 6 to 8 serves of the liver that you just described, the liver and rice, is $7.03. And if you bought the box mix of dirty rice called Zatarain's, I don't know how to say it, you need to buy the box plus they have you use 1.5 pounds of meat, but to be fair, I only accommodated for 3 ounces of meat because there's 3 ounces of liver in the dirty rice. And then use canola oil to cook it, but no broth. That is $4.28.
Okay.
And everything there would have to come from a factory. The beef would have to come from a factory. The canola oil is going to kill you, and the stuff out of a box won't taste very good. So, the basic lentils recipe I wanted to mention too, because I priced it out as actually being slightly more expensive than buying canned lentils and a package of broth, but it was barely more. So these lentils have been soaked with whey or lemon and then cooked with garlic, herbs, and spices. These are really good with like a flatbread or shredded meat or some of your sourdough bread that we mentioned before. Just keep it simple. If you can do sourdough bread once a week, don't try to do 7 kinds of bread. Just stick to that.
No.
So this is a truly medicinal healing food. It's an organic, ancestral, and filled with broth. It would cost $4.44 for the 6 to 8 serving recipe. If you bought 2 15-ounce cans of conventional canned lentils and a container of broth that is made in a factory with lots of ingredients, it would cost you $4.07.
That's on page 507 in Nourishing Traditions.
Yeah. I'll also throw out there, if you're making lentils, that you could make the Indian-style dumplings on page 509.
Yeah.
So don't miss that. Cottage potatoes on page 397. This is one of Jacob's absolute favorites. Find the most economical fat for you. I priced it as Sally wrote it, but I use fat that I have access to, so I use cheaper fats. But I priced it based on the way the recipe was written, and it would cost for a full sheet pan of organic saturated fat-rich potatoes, using local potatoes, $3.98. And if you bought the cheapest frozen southern hash brown diced potatoes, and I did not calculate in the cost of fat, which would have brought the price up, that would cost $3.58 at the grocery store. So cheaper, but you would have to calculate in the fat.
Yeah.
This is another recipe that I found, Allison, when I was trying to find something more expensive. So the spaghetti sauce recipe is a meat sauce on page 357. I was thinking what's familiar to people and what would be expensive because I was trying to find something really high priced. This is full of meat, so it's going to cost more. But what I was surprised by was that the difference wasn't as big as I thought. If you bought organic, regenerative, everything, from Azure or like the most organic versions of noodles you could buy, and a local meat, 2 pounds, your rough cost would be $25.55. It's quite an expensive meal, and it is focused, like I said, on meat. If you did a Walmart version of all the cheapest conventional, chemically raised, non-organic factory meat and pasta and everything, it would cost $16.67. So the price difference is about $10, and the Ancestral one is more expensive. So that's why I want to do things like drop the price of bread and make the beans at home, because then you have those. If you're like, I only have $100 to spend, then you've got $7 to contribute towards this or whatever. And the spaghetti.
And also, though, if you're buying a side of a cow and you're getting your meat that way, and if you're like the Italians do, growing tons of tomatoes and bottling them or canning them, then that price is going to come down quite substantially.
Yes, I did not factor in if you were raising anything at all yourself. And also, if you were to buy your beef as, like you said, a side, then the price per pound drops down significantly. But I put about the highest priced beef you'll find out here. Allison, could you... I just wanted to say also on the spaghetti that with all the herbs and everything that's in there, which are all priced out, that is literally medicinal food. The one from Walmart, you just have to hope you don't get sick. Like, it's not going to contribute to your benefit bottom line, unfortunately. Allison, could you talk about mackerel spread? This recipe is found on page 163.
Yeah, I've got my Nourishing Traditions on my lap here. I'm guessing that most people listening have gone and got their Nourishing Traditions if they haven't got it in front of them already, because it's just so awesome to follow along with everything. So thank you. The mackerel spread is something that I've made a lot, and it was one thing that I actually made for one of Gable's first foods. I have made it with tinned mackerel, and I have also made it with frozen mackerel fillets, which then I've just defrosted and grilled, waited to cool and blended it up. She talks of using Pima cream or creme fraiche in the recipe, but I've used like everything in it. I've used sour cream. I've used thick cream as well, like super thick cream.
So like a heavy cream, we would call it here.
Yeah, heavy cream. Exactly. That's what you would call it. And it's a wonderful thing to freeze. We used to freeze it when Gable was very young, in little ice cubes or little tiny containers. So I would have one meal for him, but you can freeze it in, enough for 2-day sandwiches, 3-day sandwiches. Just take it out, put it in your freezer and put it in your fridge, and then spread it on your sandwiches if you've got 3 or 4 days where you're going out and you're going to need sandwiches. Right. It's a lovely, lovely spread.
I don't know why I didn't put the price on here, because I did price it out, but what I found when I was pricing this out is that if we used double cream or sour cream or heavy cream, so heavy cream or sour cream, it would be cheaper than using a creme fraiche. Or if you were making your Pima at home, which you can do, then that would be cheaper. And I found between mackerel and herring, the herring is slightly cheaper to buy by $1 a tin. So this is definitely something I'm going to make, because this sounds delicious, and I love any fish in a can. I love it. Allison, I put sauerkraut on here, page 92. As you probably can imagine, it is a little bit cheaper to make it at home, so I will share those prices here. This is assuming you're buying organic cabbage at a kind of high price, because I priced the Azure one. I buy cabbage locally in big cases and make a bunch of kraut at once, so it actually drops the price down. But I'm assuming you are just going to make one jar here. Sally's recipe is for a 3-pound jar of kraut, and that's 3 pounds before you add water for brine. So, of course, water is 8 pounds a gallon, so water does add a significant amount of weight. But before you add the water for brine, it is 3 pounds, and it is $6 to make this extremely healthy, nutritious, delicious, probiotic, living active food. If you bought at Walmart the equivalent of a 3-pound jar, and this includes the water in the poundage, so they've already added water here, and you're buying an active and refrigerated one, which is also organic, there was no other options at Walmart, it would cost you, the homemade one, like I said, is $6. This one is a little more. It's $47.85.
This is why we included sauerkraut in that very early episode that we did, the cheapest yet the most expensive foods, because it is just bonkers, the price comparison.
And I'm glad you said that, Alison, because I'm going to jump down to the very bottom of my document and read one more thing. I think, do you have time to stay on today with me, Alison, and record an after show? Because I'm not going to get the desserts in here. There's just not enough time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we could.
Okay. So I'm going to read one more recipe, and then you and I can cut to an after show and record some more stuff and talk about what we want to make next out of Nourishing Traditions. But because this is taking forever, the kombucha recipe on page 596. This is another one where, as you can guess, it's going to be a little cheaper to make it at home. So for a half gallon of organic kombucha, it costs you $1.27 to make. And this is organic. And I bought loose tea in 1 pound bags. You don't want to buy the bagged tea if you can help it. And of course, you really want to have organic tea and organic sugar, which is quite expensive. But as you can see, when you make the bottle of kombucha, it's not too bad. So a half gallon jar costs you $1.27. And then if we added 3 ounces of organic tart cherry juice, which I don't know about you, Alison, but when I'm flavoring my kombuchas, I just use what I have. Like we strained a jar of pineapples, and so I use the leftover juice, or we just took a bag of frozen blueberries from the summer out. I'm going to take some of the blueberries. So I don't really even know how to quantify my expenses there, because I try to use something that's like would be scraps anyways, like tops from strawberries or something. But if you were going to flavor it with juice you bought expressly for that purpose, it would drive your cost up to $2.26 for a half gallon. The cheapest kombucha you could find at Walmart, which bear in mind, a lot of these, if not all of them, have sugar added after fermenting, which is why people want to know, how do I make mine so sweet? This will cost you $11.16 for a half gallon.
Oh my gosh. And that's why trendy health foods are apparently impossibly out of our budget.
I don't even want to know what it would have cost at Whole Foods or another expensive store, because I think I've seen one container for like $7 there. So it would be really, and a half gallon of kombucha is a lot. I know that in our modern culture where we like chug giant bottles of soda and stuff, it's kind of assumed you're going to drink a huge amount of kombucha, but you really need about a shot or a half a shot in a day. So you don't need that much. You don't even have to make a half gallon batch at a time, although you want it to last at least 2 weeks while your next batch is fermenting. But also, Alison, I can't hear you. I don't know if you're talking or not. But
I'm not talking. I'm just I'm reeling from the $11.16 for the kombucha. Frankly, I've fallen off my chair.
Well, as you get back on the chair and fix your microphone, I was going to say that if you're really looking at driving the cost down, don't do kombucha, do water kefir, because then you don't even have the cost of the tea, which isn't that big of a cost. The tea was 78 cents though, so it's at least half, if not more, of the expense here. Yeah. Well, it is more than half the expense. So if you want to just do water kefir, then all you need is the sugar. Yeah. Okay, Alison, let's say farewell.
So what have we got left? What have we got left for the after show?
We still have dessert. I don't have a lot of desserts, but I have a couple. And I wanted to share what I'm making next, because as you and I both know, every time you pick up Nourishing Traditions, you see, I never thought about that. And I wanted you to also tell us, I know you got a hold of some oxtail and things. I want you to tell us what you're making out of Nourishing Traditions next. So let's do that in the after show and pop that on the feed for the podcast supporters. And for the main feed, we will say... What do you want to say, Alison, to wrap this up?
I want to say thank you for doing all that research. You surprised me. And even within the budget that you have at the moment for food, you see that there's wiggle room from all the suggestions that we've come up with. Mm-hmm. And if you are able to then look at your priorities as well and maybe cut a couple of things that you've needed in the past but realise you don't need anymore, then you can make the spaghetti sauce as well.
Yeah, that's kind of my takeaway too, is look at your total budget and then start with what is simple and right in front of you. For instance, if you say, I know we use 10 cans of beans a week, well, that's a pretty obvious place to start. Or if you say, I know we use 2 loaves of bread a week, you can cut the recipe down, obviously, and then see how you can work that into your routine. Like you said, put it on your schedule or in your diary. And for me, it's a repeating task that comes up every week to do some of these things. Yeah,
exactly.
And you don't want to start with 500 repeating tasks. You want to start with one.
Just one.
And find that thing that's going to be a big bang for your buck. For me, it is sometimes buying like produce in bulk when it's in season and putting it up. Or it might just be buying your whole wheat berries in bulk and budgeting for a food mill. I mean, not a food mill, sorry, a grain mill.
A flour mill.
Yeah, flour mill thing. Or I suppose you could sit in the backyard with 2 rocks for a long time.
Yes, you could.
You could do it.
Go and find an archaeologist and get a quern and try that. Yeah.
Probably not the most realistic option, Alison.
No.
All right, well, let's let everybody go.
Over.
And I'll see you in the after show.
Yeah, we'll do.
Bye.
Bye.
If you'd like to support the podcast, you can join as a patron. Choose from various levels starting at $5. You can see what we offer at ancestralkitchenpodcast.com.
While you're there, check out our favourite books, supplements and kitchenware, or give a one-time donation.
Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.
And if you know someone who would love our show, tell them about us.
You are helping to bring ancestral food wisdom into modern kitchens, changing the world one plate at a time.